I never thought my wife would end up in some weird competition with her friends. But somehow, the subject of that competition became me. Natalie wanted to prove something to Brielle, Tessa, and Sloane. Something that honestly still pisses me off when I think about it. She wanted to show them that if she really wanted to, she could make me do absolutely anything. And the scary part? At the time, I had no clue any of this was happening. It was Friday, around 4 p.m. I was at work, right in the middle of an important meeting, when my phone suddenly started buzzing over and over again. So, the meeting. We'd been chasing this contract for about 4 months. The client, a logistics company out of Atlanta, had been in talks with 3 other firms at the same time. Our CEO had basically made it a personal mission. My boss, Derek, had put me on point because I'd built the projection models, and I knew the numbers better than anyone else on the team. He'd been pretty direct with me that morning. Close this, and the conversation about your promotion stops being a conversation. I'd been waiting on that title change for over a year. The client's name was Gerald Marsh. He'd flown in specifically for this meeting, which was either a good sign or a pressure test. Maybe both. The conference room had glass walls on 2 sides. One of those rooms where everyone in the open office can watch you without being obvious about it. We were maybe 40 minutes in. Gerald had been asking sharp questions, good ones actually, and I was answering them without hesitation. Derek was sitting to my right, quiet, letting me run it. That felt like trust, and I wasn't about to waste it. I felt the first buzz through the table. I didn't look down, kept talking, kept my eyes on Gerald. Second buzz. I shifted my weight, kept going. Third. Derek glanced at the phone on the table next to my notes. I didn't pick it up. I just angled it slightly so the screen faced down and kept my voice steady. Then a pause in the conversation, Gerald reaching for his water, and I let myself look. Natalie calling. I pressed the side button and sent it to voicemail. Gerald set down his glass. You were saying the Q3 projections. Right. I pulled the slide back up. So if you look at this column here, buzz. Natalie calling. I sent it again, kept talking. Derek's jaw was tight, but he hadn't said anything yet. Then the text came through. I only caught a piece of it before I flipped the phone back over. Pick up. Please. Something's wrong. That's when the back of my neck went cold. I've been with Natalie for 5 years. She doesn't do drama. She doesn't text like that. She barely texts at all during work hours because she knows my schedule. She'd known about this meeting specifically. I'd talked about it over coffee that morning, told her it was the kind of day where I'd basically be unreachable until 6. She'd nodded and said she'd make dinner. Pick up, please. Something's wrong. The phone buzzed again. Derek leaned slightly toward me and said quietly, Adrian. Just my name. But the way he said it. I looked at Gerald. I apologize. I need 1 minute. There may be something happening at home. Gerald gave a small nod. Not warm, not cold. Just waiting. I took the phone into the hallway. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was wrong right away. Thinner than normal, like she was keeping something back. Hey, thank you for picking up. Nat, what happened? Are you okay? I'm not great. I need you to come home. I pressed my back against the wall. Through the glass, I could see Derek standing now, hands in his pockets, watching me. Gerald was looking at his phone. What does that mean? You're not great? Did something happen? Did you fall? Are you hurt? No, I'm not. It's not like that. A pause. I can't really explain it on the phone. I just really need you here. Please. Natalie. I kept my voice low. You understand what I'm in the middle of right now? I know, and I'm so sorry. But I really need you. Here's the thing about that sentence. I really need you. From her, it didn't sound like manipulation. It sounded like fear. And because I know her, because 5 years teaches you the texture of someone's voice, I believed it. My brain started running through possibilities. Panic attack. Something with her mom. A doctor called with something. some kind of breakdown I hadn't seen coming. I stood there for about 4 seconds, then I walked back into the room. Derek looked up. "I have to go." I said it plainly. Not apologetically, not in a rush, just direct. "Something's happened at home. I have to go right now." Derek stared at me. "I'm sorry?" "I know what I'm walking away from. I'm sorry, Derek. Something serious is going on." He glanced at Gerald, then back at me. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, but there was an edge under it. "Adrian, we are in the middle of a client meeting. A client who flew in today. You understand that if you walk out right now, I understand. This does not look good for you or for us. I understand that too." Gerald said nothing. He just watched. And that was almost worse. That quiet attention from a man who'd seen a lot of business conversations go sideways. Derek dropped his voice lower. "Is this actually an emergency, or—" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm going." I picked up my notebook, my phone, my jacket off the back of the chair. I looked at Gerald directly and said, "Mr. Marsh, I apologize. I wouldn't do this if I had any other choice." He gave me a small nod. Unreadable. I walked out. Past the assistant's desk, past 2 colleagues who'd clearly been watching through the glass, and now suddenly found their monitors very interesting. Through the lobby, out to the parking structure. By the time I got to my car, my hands were still steady. I wasn't spiraling, I was just moving. The way you move when someone you love sounds scared and you don't have all the information yet. I pulled out of the structure and onto the street, already running through everything it might be. It didn't occur to me, not for 1 second, that there might be nothing wrong at all. I tried calling her twice on the way. First time she didn't pick up. Second time she sent back a text. "Just hurry up, I'm okay. Just come home." That made it worse. The "I'm okay." Like she was reassuring me. Like she'd at least had the presence of mind to de-escalate without actually telling me anything. My head kept going. I ran through the list. Her mom had some health stuff last year. Her friend Tessa had gone through a bad stretch. Maybe it was something emotional, something she couldn't say on the phone. Maybe she'd had a scare and didn't want to worry me until I was there. I ran a yellow on Lyndon because I wasn't thinking about Lyndon. I was thinking about the look on Derek's face. I was thinking about Gerald Marsh watching me pick up my jacket. I was thinking about Natalie's voice and trying to read it again, like I could rewind it and find something I'd missed. I pulled into the driveway fast, left the car slightly crooked, didn't bother fixing it. The front door wasn't locked. I pushed through it, already talking. "Nat." I stopped. The living room was lit up warm, music playing from the little speaker on the shelf, something with a beat, low enough to talk over. On the coffee table, a cheese board, wine glasses, a half-empty bottle of something rosé. Natalie was on the couch. Brielle was in the armchair. Tessa and Sloane were on the floor with their backs against the couch like they'd been there for a while. They all looked up at me. I stood in the doorway, still breathing hard, still in my work clothes, jacket crooked from grabbing it off the chair, and I looked at my wife. She smiled. It was, I don't know how to describe it, proud, satisfied, like she'd just finished a puzzle. She leaned back into the couch cushion and said, "I told you, I can make my husband do anything." Brielle made a noise that was half laugh, half shriek. Tessa put her hand over her mouth. Sloane was holding her phone up at a slight angle, and I realized she'd been recording. Brielle said something like, "Oh my God, he actually came." And the way she said it, like I was a dog that had learned a trick, landed somewhere in my chest I'm still not completely over. I stood there for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then I said, "What is this?" It wasn't really a question. I just needed to say something out loud while my brain caught up. Natalie's smile softened a little. Not with guilt, just with the slight adjustment of someone who could see I wasn't immediately finding this funny. It was just a bet. We were talking about, it doesn't matter. I said that you would come home if I really needed you to, and everyone thought you wouldn't because of your meeting, and you came. She paused. That's actually a good thing? You said something was wrong. I know. I needed it to sound convincing. Someone, I think Tessa, started to say something that might have been a diffuser, something like, okay, so maybe this was a little much, but I didn't really hear her. What I heard was the meeting room, Derek's voice, the way Gerald Marsh had gone quiet while my boss dismantled me in front of him, the glass walls with my colleagues behind them, all of that laid out like furniture in a room I was suddenly standing in the middle of, and the reason for it was that my wife had wanted to win something. Natalie was still talking. Something about love and how it meant I'd always show up for her. Something about how it was actually sweet when you thought about it. I looked at her and said very quietly, I might lose my job. That got through a little. Her expression shifted. What? I walked out of the most important meeting I've had in 2 years. The client flew in from Atlanta. My boss put me in charge of it specifically, and I walked out because you told me something was wrong. I stopped, and nothing was wrong. Adrian, I couldn't be in that room anymore. Not with Brielle and Tessa and Sloane sitting there, the wine and the cheese and the music still going. Not with whoever's phone had just captured my face at the door. I walked out, got in the car, drove back to the office on a kind of autopilot I didn't know I had. There was some part of me still hoping, not rationally, just hoping the way you do when the thing you're hoping for is already gone, that maybe Gerald was still there. Maybe I could explain. Maybe I could get back in front of it. The parking structure was half empty. The conference room was dark. The office had that end-of-day quiet that feels different from morning quiet. Derek's door was open. He was at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there with his arms crossed, and when I walked in, he looked at me like I was something he was going to have to deal with. Is everything all right at home? He said. Flat. Not a question. I thought it was an emergency. It wasn't. He let that sit there. Then, Gerald left about 15 minutes after you did. He was professional about it, but his assistant called Carla on the way to the airport. He looked at me. He's going with Franklin Group. I'd known somewhere on the drive over, but hearing it was different. You want to tell me what actually happened? Derek said. I thought about saying it. I thought about the exact words. My wife made a bet with her friends. I turned it over, tried to find a version of it that didn't make me feel like I was reporting from my own humiliation. There wasn't one. I thought she was in trouble, I said. I was wrong. Derek nodded slowly. He looked like he was deciding something. You're done here, Adrian. He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. I nodded. I didn't argue. I think some part of me had already let go of it on the drive back, which is its own kind of sad. I cleaned out my desk in about 12 minutes. Nobody said much. A few people looked at me the way people look at a car accident. Not to gawk, just that involuntary glance you can't quite stop. There was a coffee cart around the corner from the small park on 4th. I ordered a medium black and sat on a bench and just let time pass for a while. The city did its early evening thing around me. People heading home, a dog barking somewhere. I'd been at that company for 6 years. 6 years of 7 a.m. calls and weekend emails and covering for other people's gaps because I cared about the work. I'd built those projection models from scratch. I knew that contract better than anyone in the office. And I'd walked away from it because my wife's voice had sounded a certain way on the phone, and I'd believed her. That was the part I kept coming back to. Not even the job, really. The fact that I'd believed her. That I'd made a decision based on 5 years of knowing someone, based on trusting the texture of her fear, and it had been completely manufactured. I sat there until the coffee went cold. Then I drove home. I didn't put music on. The silence in the car felt right. I didn't have anything to fill it with. Her friends were gone by the time I got back. The wine glasses had been rinsed and left in the drying rack, which for some reason bothered me. That small domestic tidiness sitting there like nothing had happened. The music was off. The cheese board was in the fridge. Natalie was at the kitchen table with her phone. She looked up when I came in, and whatever she saw in my face made her put the phone down. She started to say something and I cut her off. I wasn't loud. I want to be clear about that. Because I don't think volume is the measure of how serious something is. I spoke at a completely normal level, but there was nothing gentle in it. I told her I'd been building toward that contract for 4 months. That Derek had specifically chosen me to run the meeting. That I'd been told, in direct language, that closing it meant a promotion I'd been waiting on for over a year. I told her I'd walked out because she'd sounded scared, because I knew her voice and it had sounded genuinely scared, and I had 5 years of evidence that she didn't fake that. I told her she had manufactured that. She sat very still while I said all of this. Then she started explaining. The conversation with her friends had gotten away from her. Brielle and Sloane had been going back and forth about something. She fumbled trying to explain what, something about husbands and priorities and who had the most devoted partner. And Natalie had said she knew I'd always come home if she needed me. And they'd pushed back. Said that was easy to claim. Said my meeting was too big. That no man was going to walk out of something like that. And she'd said, fine, watch. I just wanted to prove that you loved me, she said. I looked at her for a moment. You wanted to prove it to Brielle. She didn't answer that directly. She said it had gotten out of hand. She said she hadn't thought it would actually affect anything seriously. She said she'd thought I'd pop out, see that she was fine, maybe be annoyed, and go back. You knew I was in the middle of negotiations with a client who flew in from another state. I know. You knew that. You knew it this morning when I told you. Adrian, I know. I wasn't thinking. I lost my job. Silence. She looked at me the way people look when they've heard a word, but need a second for it to mean something. What? Derek let me go tonight. The client left. The deal is gone. Derek let me go. She stood up from the table. Wait, are you serious right now? I didn't answer that. I just stood there. Adrian. She came toward me. We'll figure it out. You'll find something else. You're good at what you do. This doesn't have to. Don't. I said it quietly, and she stopped. I went upstairs. I wasn't ready to be in the same room as her. Not because I was afraid of what I'd say, but because I had nothing left to say that night that would have been useful. The weekend was bad in a different way than the fight. The fight, at least, had motion to it. The weekend was just stillness. I sat with my laptop in the second bedroom for most of Saturday and answered no messages and responded to her in 2 or 3 words when she checked on me. She made food and left it near the door a couple of times. I ate some of it. I slept maybe 4 hours Friday night. Saturday was worse. What I kept circling back to wasn't even Derek, or the contract, or the job. It was Sloane's phone. That angle. That slight tilt of the screen in her hand when I'd appeared in the doorway. Out of breath, still in my work clothes, scanning the room for whatever disaster I'd come home to. She'd been recording. She'd come to Natalie's house, eaten the food, drunk the wine, and held up her phone to capture the moment Natalie won the bet. I thought about those women a lot that weekend, Brielle especially, and Sloane. I've never been a person who holds on to opinions about other people's friends. I know marriage isn't supposed to be us versus them, and I've always thought the couples who turn into fortresses against the outside world are usually miserable. But I sat in that room and thought about what it must look like from the outside. What their lives must be if this was entertainment. If you could sit in someone's marriage and poke at it with a stick for a Saturday afternoon and go home feeling good about it. And the part that kept cutting at me underneath all of that was Natalie. Not that she'd hurt me, people make bad choices and I knew that, but that she'd let it happen at all. That Brielle had raised an eyebrow and made a challenge, and instead of saying that's not something I'd do, Natalie had picked up her phone and called me in the middle of the most important meeting of my professional year. At some point Saturday night, I thought about divorce. Not for long. Not with any real planning behind it. But the thought arrived and I let it sit there for a while instead of chasing it out. I owed it that much, to look at it honestly rather than shut it down out of habit. The conclusion I came to after sitting with it was that Natalie hadn't stopped loving me. I didn't think that. What she'd done was juvenile and destructive, and it had come from a place of ego and peer pressure, and not thinking past the next 10 minutes. But it wasn't cruelty. It wasn't contempt. It was a catastrophically stupid mistake made by someone who genuinely believed, right up until the moment I said the words, that nothing real would break. That understanding didn't fix how I felt, but it changed the shape of it slightly. Monday morning, I drove to the office to collect my things. I'd asked Derek's assistant to make sure the time was cleared. I didn't want an audience for it, but you can't fully control these things in an open office. A few people found reasons to be elsewhere. A few didn't. I had a box, not a big one. Mostly personal items, a few notebooks, a photo of Natalie and me from a trip we took 2 years ago that I'd kept on my desk. I put everything in without making a production of it. Signed the paperwork HR had ready. Said thank you to the woman at reception, whose name was Carol and who'd always been kind to me. A guy named Patrick from my team came over and shook my hand and said something like, "For what it's worth, we all know you got a bad deal here." I appreciated that. I didn't have a lot of words for him. I carried the box out to the car and put it in the trunk. 6 years. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute before I started the engine. When I came home that evening and set the box on the kitchen counter, Natalie looked at it the way you look at something that changes the air in a room. She'd known, intellectually, since Friday. But I think part of her had been renegotiating it all weekend, without telling me. Talking herself into the idea that maybe I'd overstated it on emotion, that the meeting had gone badly, but the job was still there, that Derek had said something harsh and we'd all sleep on it. And by Monday, it would be a difficult conversation that ended in a warning, not a termination. The box ended that. The folders, the notebooks, the photo of us in its small frame. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there looking at it. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor, slowly, like her legs had made the decision for her. She didn't cry loudly. She just put her face in her hands. I stood in the doorway and watched her. And I felt a complicated thing that I still haven't fully sorted out. Something between love and grief, and a distance that hadn't been there a week ago. I didn't go to her right away, but I didn't leave the room either. The box sat in the corner of the bedroom for 3 days before I moved it to the closet. I don't know why I left it out that long. Maybe I needed to see it. Maybe I needed Natalie to keep seeing it. She'd shifted in ways that were hard to be angry at. She wasn't performing, or if she was, the sincerity underneath it was real enough that I couldn't dismiss it. Coffee in the morning without being asked. She stopped filling silences with nervous chatter, which was her default when she was uncomfortable, and just sat with me instead. She asked how I was and waited for the actual answer. The problem was that I didn't have much of one. The anger had burned itself down to something quieter and harder to name. I wasn't punishing her deliberately. I wasn't building a case. I was just less than I'd been a week ago, like something load-bearing had shifted and I hadn't found my footing. One evening we were at the kitchen table after dinner. She'd made pasta, the kind I liked, and we'd eaten most of it without talking much. I had my hands around a coffee mug. I was looking at it, and then I was talking. "You didn't just ruin a meeting," I said. "You broke something in me." She went very still. "I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it as a fact. I trusted my read of you, your voice, the way you sounded on the phone. I ran it through everything I know about you, and I believed it completely. I acted on it, and it was constructed." I set the mug down. That's not something I can just reset. She was already crying. She didn't try to stop it. Then she said, "I know." Just that. Not an explanation. Not a pivot to context. Just those 2 words sitting there, taking the full weight of what I'd said. Then she kept going, and her voice was unsteady, but she didn't look away from me. She said she'd been replaying Friday in her head every hour since it happened. That she'd watched me walk through that door, out of breath, pale, ready for the worst. And something had landed in her chest in that moment that she hadn't shaken since. She said she'd seen, in 1 second, exactly what I'd been willing to give up for her, and what she'd done with it. "I used your love for me as a prop," she said, in front of people who thought it was funny. "I'm so ashamed of that." She pressed her hand flat on the table. "I love you. I have loved you for 5 years, and I have never doubted that you were the best decision I ever made. And I treated that like it was something I could show off." She shook her head. "I don't have an excuse. I got caught up and I stopped thinking about you as a person and I'm sorry, Adrian. I am so genuinely sorry." I didn't say anything for a moment. I believed her. That was the thing I kept arriving at, no matter how many times I walked around the wreckage of that week. I believed that she meant every word of it, and that the version of her who'd made that call on Friday was not the full version of who she was, but had been a real version, one shaped by those friendships over time, slowly, in ways neither of us had noticed. I told her that. I told her I didn't have a problem with her having friends, that I'd never wanted to be the kind of husband who managed her life. But what Brielle and Sloane had done, sitting in our living room, treating our marriage like an experiment, one of them holding up a phone to record it, that wasn't something I could absorb and move past without something changing. And the harder thing underneath it was that Natalie had let it happen, had not just allowed it, but started it. "People like that need drama," I said. "They need someone else's life to feel interesting. And after long enough, you start drifting toward their version of normal without noticing." She nodded. She was wiping her face. "I left work for you because I love you," I said. "I would do it again under real circumstances, but it cost me something I can't get back. And if you want to fight for this, actually fight for it, then I need those people gone." She looked at me for a long moment. No argument. No negotiation. "No, but we've been close since college, or it wasn't entirely their fault." She just said, "You're right. I already knew that before you said it." She picked up her phone, right there at the table, while I watched. She wrote something, long enough that it took a few minutes. She showed it to me before sending. It said, in plain language, that what happened had nearly ended her marriage, that she held herself responsible and not them, but that she was done, and that she didn't want contact going forward. She sent it to Brielle, then Sloane, then Tessa. Then she blocked all three and set the phone face down on the table. She looked at me. Something loosened in my chest. Not everything, not even most of it, but something real. Because what I'd needed wasn't control over who she spent time with. It was evidence that she could see those friendships clearly, that she understood what they'd been doing to her sense of proportion, to her sense of what was acceptable. The blocking wasn't the point. The clarity was. We didn't fix everything that night. But we sat together, and it was the first time in days that sitting together hadn't felt like sitting in separate rooms. 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't know. Atlanta area code. I almost sent it to voicemail. I was updating my resume, in the specific grim mood that comes with summarizing your own professional life in bullet points after being fired. I picked up. "Is this Adrian?" "It is." "Gerald Marsh." I sat back. He said he'd spent time going through the full materials from Friday's meeting. The projection models, the proposal, the supporting documentation. He said they were thorough and well-constructed, and that it was clear the numbers had been built by someone who understood the operational reality, and not just the financial surface. I said I appreciated that, and that I was sorry for how Friday had gone. He made a brief, dismissive sound. "I want to ask you something directly." "Of course." "When you left that room," he said, "I watched you. The way you picked up your things, the way you spoke to me before walking out. You weren't scrambling. You weren't performing urgency for my benefit. You just made a decision and you left." He paused. "I've been in a lot of meetings. That kind of clarity under pressure is not common." I didn't say anything. "I've built 3 companies," he continued. "And the thing I've learned, the thing I keep relearning, is that how a person behaves when they're choosing between something professional and something personal tells you almost everything about who they actually are." A pause. "You were in the middle of the most important meeting of your quarter, and you left because your wife needed you. Whatever was actually happening at home, you didn't know that yet. You just knew she'd called." "That's right. I like that," he said simply. "I like working with people who have a life outside of what they can do for me. who have actual priorities. Corporate performance is learnable. That kind of ethics is either there or it isn't. He let that sit for a second. Your boss, on the other hand, Derek, spent the 20 minutes after you left explaining why your exit wasn't his fault. At one point he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that you'd been warned about maintaining professionalism. He paused. That's when I decided to leave. I was quiet for a moment. I didn't know that. I assumed you didn't. He shifted. I have a position open, director level, operational strategy, Atlanta-based. The compensation is better than what I suspect you were making, and the title reflects the actual scope of the role. He paused. I'd like you to consider it. I took a breath. Then he said, the offer stands. Take a few days. That evening, I sat across from Natalie at the kitchen table and told her everything. She didn't move. Hands flat on the table, eyes on me, completely still. When I finished, she just stared for a moment. Then something broke open in her. Her shoulders dropped, her hand went over her mouth, and she was crying in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. Not the quiet, controlled kind from earlier that week. Something deeper, like a person who'd been holding a weight and finally understood how heavy it actually was. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held on tight. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. That was 2 months ago. We're in Atlanta now. New apartment, new neighborhood, new everything. The city is bigger than where we came from, louder, more alive, and neither of us knows anyone here yet, which turned out to be exactly what we needed. No history. No one who'd heard a version of that Friday. No running into coworkers at the grocery store who'd watched me walk out of a glass-walled conference room carrying my jacket. Just us, starting over with our eyes open. Natalie has been, I don't have a single word for it, present. More present than I can remember her being in years. She makes coffee in the morning and sits with me instead of scrolling her phone. She reaches for my hand when we're walking somewhere. She says, I love you often enough that I've started noticing the different ways she means it. The casual kind, the grateful kind, the kind that comes out of nowhere in the middle of a quiet evening and lands like she just needed me to know. She still apologizes sometimes. Not constantly, not performatively, just these small moments where something reminds her of what she did, and she says it again, quietly, and means it again. I've stopped telling her she doesn't have to. I think she needs to say it for herself as much as for me, and I've made my peace with that. The toxic orbit is completely gone. Brielle, Sloan, Tessa, blocked, removed, finished. Natalie hasn't wavered on it once. She told me recently that she'd been thinking about how long she'd been slowly adjusting herself to fit into that group dynamic, laughing at the right moments, performing the right attitudes, and that she hadn't noticed how much of herself she'd traded away for it. She said losing them didn't feel like a loss at all. It felt like putting down something heavy she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. We've started meeting people here together, normal people. Couples who talk about their lives without turning everything into a competition. A guy named Marcus from my new office who has a dry sense of humor, and a wife who teaches kindergarten. A couple from our building who invited us over for dinner last week, and we stayed 3 hours longer than we planned. Real friendships, being built slowly, the normal way. The job is everything Gerald said it would be. The work is harder and more interesting than anything I'd done before, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually in the right room. Not just competent, but genuinely matched to what I'm doing. Gerald runs things the way I'd always thought work was supposed to be run. He asks questions and listens to the answers. He gives credit where it belongs. I think about the shape of all this sometimes. A stupid bet on a Friday afternoon, a phone call, a meeting I walked out of, a box of office supplies on my kitchen counter, and somehow, on the other side of all that wreckage, I ended up with a better job, a better city, and a marriage that, I say this carefully because I know how it sounds, is stronger than it was before any of it happened. I've turned that over in my head more times than I can count. The math doesn't work. And yet here we are. I'm not a particularly religious person. I don't reach for that language easily. But there are moments, sitting on the new couch in the new apartment with Natalie's head on my shoulder, and Atlanta doing its thing outside the window, where I think about the improbability of the path that got us here. And I think something was working in all of that. Something I couldn't see from inside it. Maybe that's what faith actually is. Not certainty. Just the ability to look back at the wreckage and notice that it pointed somewhere. We're pointed somewhere good. That's enough for me. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.